Yep.
And I'll say hello to everyone. My name is Hyla, and I'm the exhibition coordinator at the Marion Art Gallery at SUNY Fredonia. And we are currently hosting En Foco's photography exhibition, Dos Mundos, Reconstructing Narratives. And it closes this Sunday, so there's still an opportunity to see it if you haven't been by. And I'm here to present to you. We're facilitating a conversation today between distinguished SUNY professor Alberto Rey and the executive director of En Foco, Bill Aguado. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to turn the screen over to you.
Well, Bill, I've been doing research on for this presentation for about a week, and I just can't tell you how excited I am to talk to you. I have a lot of questions, and we are very excited to have Dos Mundos exhibition. We've been taking our students down there, and Hyla's been nice enough to give us a tour. And I think Stephanie and Juanita did a wonderful job curating the exhibition, and it's very exciting. So let me ask a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you were director of the Bronx Council for the Arts for 30 years. And during your tenure, you created a lot of programs and found support for a lot of programs. But I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about how the Beryl Fellowships came about. And again, Beryl is BRIO, and it stands for Bronx Recognizes Its Own. And not only how it came about, but how do you think its effects have been seen in the community and within the artists in the community?
Oh, it was, well, first, let me say, it's all part of a process that happened in the 80s at the Bronx Council on the Arts. I had two wonderful staff people who were artists, who were also curators, who had visions and felt strongly about their visions. And that helped define my experience at the Bronx Council on the Arts. It wasn't that I was managing an arts organization and I needed to preserve the organization. It was about serving the artists in our community and making sure that they had what they needed. And the artists were the priority. And that formula helped me so much. And as I looked at what my universe was, and as I learned from the artists as to what their needs were, what their passions were, what their vision was, it helped me to define the vision of Bronx Council on the Arts. And one of the experiences was I was on the board of New York Foundation for the Arts, and they had the fellowship program. And, you know, I was a major fan and support and advocate for the fellowship program. But then there were very little funding came to the Bronx or any of the other boroughs or upstate for that matter. And I kept on arguing. They said, well, you know, this is what the panel does, but we know how panels are. It's who you select to be the panelists. So went back and forth. Finally, I said, that's it. I'm gonna do something in the Bronx. And then I organized, I had a staff person named Betty Sue Hertz, who is now the director of the Wallach Gallery at Columbia University. We sat down and mapped out a strategy that we rotated the panelists every year. None of the panelists were ever from the Bronx. And we made sure that every artist who applied was a resident of the Bronx. And we went to great lengths. And then we had to get the funding. And the city never funded an arts council for something like this. And that was such a pain in the butt. And fortunately, the person at the time, Kathleen Hughes, said, you know, okay, I will take a chance, but we need to do some sort of community service at the end. So it started out with 10 awards at $15,000, at $1,500 a piece, I believe, or 10 out of 1,000. very modest back in the 80s, and it grew. And its importance grew, and it became a catalyst for artists to relocate to the Bronx. It became a catalyst for artists to becoming involved. Parallel to that was the creation of Longwood Gallery, which was Fred Wilson. Fred Wilson and Betty Sue were close friends. And this is what the image you see now is at CUNY's Alsos Community College. It wasn't the school that we took over and created studios back in 1982, 83. And with Fred Wilson on the one hand, Betty Sue Hertz on the other hand, and we had Boss Audio, who was at a studio at our Longwood place. So I had these three wonderful people, very different visions, very different perspectives, all about engagement in the community, all about creating a message, a dialogue with the community, all about supporting the artists. So getting back to the Brio, it grew gradually. And by the time I left 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we were giving out 25 awards at $3,000 a piece. When Mayor de Blasio came in and Tom Ficklepole came in, our Brio program was increased, as was in all the other boroughs of New York City. A similar type funding was created with city money. It was the belief that all communities of color, all communities of immigrants, all communities of people who are invested in the neighborhoods of New York City deserve to have the best possible work that their communities can create. And I'm proud of that legacy. I'm proud of the work that it took to validate it. I remember there was a person at the Bronx Museum said, I don't want to celebrate your artists because it's substandard. Luckily I have some good staff that prevented me from losing it with him. But then I decided I can't worry about that person. It became, what was important was my commitment to the artist. And then we did a lot of different things to make sure that the artists had additional resources. One thing we did, when we moved the gallery, we have prevented a school from being shuttered. And it became a home for artists. It became a home, the original home in the Bronx for Pregones Theater, Cornell Extension University, some education program, and we had an entire floor in Enfocal, an Enfocal Bronx Council with galleries and there was studios and an exhibition space. Because we became so stabilized, the Board of Ed came back into the community and we all had to move. So we moved to Alsos Community College. And I was involved with Alsos for a lot of years prior to that. So I knew we had done a lot of joint programming and they didn't have the resources to support their galleries. They asked if I would do it. And I jumped at the opportunity because it was so accessible to the city. 3 subways, a couple of bus lines, made it very a positive place. And what do we do next? And you had a picture of the trolley, and a colleague in the Borough President's Economic Development Office says, Bill, I have a trolley. Would you like to try it one day? I said, what, are you crazy? Why would I want to do a trolley? Well, then I said, I came up with this plan, the South Bronx Culture Corridor, to draw attention to everybody, all the arts organizations in the South Bronx. And the trolley was the vein that connected everything. And it started off, in fact, when we first started, we had maybe 1 or 2 people get on the trolley, but then we started to get up, became well known. So the stop was at the Bronx Museum, at Pregones Theater, and several galleries and artist studios further in the South, and then back to Ostos. And we did reruns the first Wednesday of every month. Well, and then we started contracting with artists to do performances on the trolley, a choreographer, a bomba player, someone reading poetry. So it was always engaging the artists. And we found that people coming from Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico, or even coming from who have family in the Bronx, would schedule their trips to the Bronx to be on the trolley, to get on the trolley. And whether it was 100 degrees or we had a blizzard, these people, everyone always came, and I would beg them, come on, it's too hot. But it became a symbol of artists. It became a symbol of arts organizations in the community. It became a symbol of the community, that we care about our communities. So you had Longwood, you had Brio, and you had the trolley, all of that working together. And it wasn't separate programs, they were all related, because they were all related to the artists that we had and the artists that we celebrated. So it was a wonderful experience for 30 years. And that's where I first met Juanita Alonso, who was one of the co-curators for Dos Mundos. She came on as a staff person in the gallery. And I guess it was about 2007, 2008, Juanita became the director of the gallery. Another person who was very much involved with Dos Mundos and a staff person at Enfocal was Kim Rose. She joined us. She was a graduate of our art handlers training program. And Brio, let me just step back a second. Brio evolved. We were offered funds from the Ford Foundation through a conduit to create a program. There was one for Harlem and one for us in the South Bronx. So Harlem and I combined our resources to create the Urban Artists Initiative, the first grants program, citywide grants program for artists of color. It lasted 3 years. That's what Kim Rose came in, because the first year, fund disability, you get 100 applications, 100 requests for support, you consider yourself an amazing success. This is before all this computer stuff. We received 1,008 paper applications and support material. The back end of Enfocal, of the Longwood Gallery was filled with all these applications. And that's what Kim Rose helped us organize everything, to put it all on computer and organize the panels. And 95% of the panels were by artists, professionals, curators, poets, choreographers of color that decided how much, which artists would get the funding. And the other thing that we did is, because my biggest belief is you can't succeed unless you involve the community. And by involving the community, it meant that I secured 3 intermediaries to help reach out. And we would funnel the funds through them, because if you have the money, you can build the loyalty. So the Association of Hispanic Arts reached out to the Latino community. Asian American Arts Alliance reached out to the Asian community, and the Harlem Arts Alliance reached out to the African American community. And all together we worked, and it was an amazing success. I think that was one question you asked. I don't know if I have the reputation. I start talking, that's it.
Yeah, that was good. That was good. You hit a couple things that I had on my list. One of the things I wanted to ask is if you could, I know that you have supported a lot of artists over the years with the Beryl Fellowships. Can you mention a couple that, I think you mentioned Fred Wilson. Can you mention, I think we have some slides of Fred's work. Any other artists that you think you would want to mention?
Well, Raimundi Ortiz was a Beryl Fellowship winner, and she's now an associate professor at Central Florida University, for one. Miriam, oh, God. There was a couple of wonderful choreographers that received funding from us. What you have here is Fred Wilson. That was not an applicant for Beryl, but he was director and co-founder of the Longwood Gallery. And what we have here is an exhibit that he organized called Museums with a View, if I'm not mistaken. And it was 3 different rooms in our studio space at what was formerly PS 39, the South Bronx. It was all converted into 3 different types of museums. One was a contemporary museum, another one was a historic museum, and the last was an anthropologic museum. Symbols of those 3 places. And it just generated so much interest in the work that Fred had done at that, and allowed him. See, how I work with artists is you create, I give you the resources, you create, and all I want in return is the best work you can provide me. Secondly, if you're gonna have a problem, I want to know before anyone else knows. And for some of Fred's works, one of Fred's exhibitions had to be canceled because it was to involve Russian artists, and it was titled The Evil Empire. So we had that problem with that exhibit. The other problem we had, because it was the title of The Evil Empire, we had conservative commentators, columnists in the newspapers who thought that we were talking about the United States. So Russia was giving me a hard time. The United States, the conservative right wing was challenging us. And no one ever asked what the exhibition was about. It wasn't about Russia being an evil empire. It was the challenges that artists had. And so that was one of the wonderful experiences that we had. This was another one. Is this? Yeah, this is Fred Wilson's Rooms with View. This is the Historic Museum. This is a classroom. These are 3 public school classrooms that were converted, that Fred managed to really create environments that resemble a type of museums that people would go to. And it was very popular. We drew a lot of people. If you know the public school system in New York City, there were no elevators, so everything had to be carried up the steps. And we were on the 2nd floor. And the 2nd floor actually meant the 3rd floor. But that was a type of, we always gave the artists a lot of freedom to create. And Fred would sometimes invite guest curators to come in. And one was Dr. Kelly Jones. She's director, chair of the African American art department at Columbia University. She was one of the early curators. This is one of my favorites. This is Pepón Osorio's installation of a courtroom. Let me get you some. I'll be right back. This is a gavel that Pepón had given me. That was part of that installation, and this was at the Feldman Gallery down in Soho. Pepón started in our studios program, and he was artist in resident for a lot of years, and a very dear friend. And his work captured the issues of culture in a very oppressive mainstream, whether it's the courtroom or there was one, he did a video exchange of a person in prison with his son. And his son would ask him questions, and it was taped, and then the parent would respond to those questions or answers, or the parent would ask the son questions. These are types of dialogue. These are types of community engagement that you could not put a dollar value to. So you have Fred Wilson, you have Bebongo Osorio, two of the most extraordinary artists, two of the finest human beings I've ever met. And they both won the MacArthur Genius Award. Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know much about this example, but this was Bebongo Osorio. This is the type of installation he did. They both won MacArthur Genius Awards the same year. We celebrated them in the Bronx, but none of the media thought it was newsworthy, to come and celebrate Bebong and Fred with us, which is the challenges that we have had historically with the media, that we didn't have any relevance, that we weren't newsworthy. Today will be a different story. Or back then in 97, 98, but if they were part of a gallery in Manhattan, the news media would have been all over it. But because we were in the Bronx, it wasn't considered important. Bebong brought issues, not necessarily issues that people in the community wanted to deal with, issues of crime within our families, or how we are criminals. There's some criminals in our families, and how they impacted on the community. But yet, how do you respond to it? You don't ignore it. You address it, and Bebong would address it through his art. Is there another one? Then,
let me ask you a question. So after you retired from the Bronx Council for the Arts, you took over the directorship of Enfocal, and the exhibition that's at our campus, Dos Mundos, was curated by Juanita Lonzo and Stephanie Lindquist, and they curated from past Enfocal fellows. Right. So I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about how and why you got into Enfocal, running it, and about the fellowship, and how you brought this together to include Nova Luz, which is the publication that comes out. Is it twice a year, I believe?
Twice a year, yes.
Yeah. And it's a very ambitious publication with high quality reproductions. So if you could tell us about how you got into Enfocal and the fellowship, and how you were able to bundle these three things together: the fellowship, the exhibition, and the publication.
Well, let me start by saying I first met Trolley Rivera in 1975, the second year that Enfocal had been incorporated. And he used to do these pop-up galleries in different communities, either festivals, block parties, and what have you. And this was in Central Park, the Puerto Rican Day Parade. As you know, I'm also a photographer, not a professional photographer, not an artist. I guess I love to take pictures. And Charlie and I met, and then we stayed in touch. And then when I took over at the Bronx Council on the Arts, you know, Charlie and I became friends, became colleagues, and I started working closely with him, trying to help him stabilize Enfocal. At the same time, Plagones moved to the Bronx, and at the same time, Mind Builders Creative Arts, an extraordinary community-based organization. So I spent a lot of time helping to open up funding sources for them. So I funded Enfocal over the years. We had a category that we would fund arts organizations of $300,000 and under, and so Enfocal was always funded. When I retired, and I did some consultant work, and mostly I just, went to museums, walked around, spent time with my wife. Then I ran into a colleague of mine, a very good friend of mine, who had worked for Bronx Council and was on the board of Enfocal. They told me that, the executive director never came back. The board of directors walked off, and Frank and Bayer was genuinely one of the most decent human beings I've ever met. And I said, well, Frank, let's sit down. So we put together a group of people to talk about it. And then it got to the point where people would just talk. So I discussed it with my wife, and I said, this was 5 years after I had retired. I said, I have the skills. I know how to fundraise. I still have a lot of connections. And rather than staying home and wasting away, I would like to use my experience, my 30, 40 years of experience in managing and being an activist in the community, to see what I can do to help preserve their collection. I had no idea what the collection was, but I knew the history of Enfocal, which was the history of the Puerto Rican people early on in the history of artists of color since. To me, that was an important legacy that I wanted to help preserve. And when I came on to Enfocal, I guess was the end of December 2015, or I had a part-timer that came in with me. And I did this as a volunteer. And we actually had to make up a lot of lost time with program that we had to do. The funding had been received. And the one thing I learned from my Brio experience was the moment you put dollars in the hands of artists and you are committed to quality support of artists, I was determined to provide funding for the artists. So the first year, it was five artists awarded $1,000 a piece. And then looking for a theme for Nova Luz, because we had to have this all done in 6 months that would normally take a year. I said, why don't we dedicate the Nova Luz to the fellows? And he said, well, we might as well try and do an exhibition. I didn't know if we were going to make it past 6 months or 8 months, but I said, well, and Cheryl Willis from NYU offered me space at NYU to have an exhibit. And I said, all of a sudden, bundling makes so much sense. Bundling enabled us to begin to each one building on its own assets to market your artists. And with Nova Luz, I became definitely committed to providing the best quality production that I can. Being Puerto Rican, being Latino, coming from the Bronx, coming from Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, I wanted to make sure that I would never, ever sacrifice quality or compromise quality. It was always important that we produce the best, that I could take this magazine and compare it to any other arts magazine or compare it to any other magazine that exists, that this was a quality piece. I would not compromise that. As it so happened, the first curator I had was Juanita Alonso. She was still working at Longwood Gallery. I said, honey, if you have a little time, can you help me with this, to help put together this exhibit? of three women from the South Bronx, three Puerto Ricans from the South Bronx. And we did an exhibit, and we did a Nova Luz issue. That was the first issue. The second one was the Five Fellows. And, you know, I've always enjoyed working with Juanita. I have respected her. I've seen her grow, not only as an artist, not only as a curator, but as a person, as a visionary. And I was so delighted to have her part of it. As it was so happened, Kim Rose, who worked with Juanita at the Longwood Gallery, I hired her as a consultant to develop the first fellowship program. So my two partners from the Longwood Gallery, dear friends of mine, became involved as consultants at Enfocal. And that's how it all began. And then for the longest time, I used this wonderful designer from Puerto Rico called Nestor. He was Nestor Otero, fabulous designer. And he set the standard. And as you know, I've known him since the 80s. And I said, well, it's important for me to bring him back into the flow here in the Bronx, here in New York City. All of this was that we're not just a Bronx organization. We are an organization that supports artists that have a vision, that represent the highest level of quality, and that everyone should know. And it has been a glorious number of years. We did two. After the second round of fellowships, there was 10 fellows, and we had it in where we have our offices at the Andrew Friedman home, which is formerly a retirement home for millionaires that lost their money during the Depression. Yeah, those things do happen. But they have wonderful ballrooms that we use as a gallery space, and we had organized the exhibition, the fellowships exhibition there. And, you know, you realize that, you know, with Nova Luz, with the fellowships, with the people who are involved with Enfocal, I kept on depending on Juanita to actually curate for us. And 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, Kim joined us as the director of operations from Longwood. A former staff member from Bronx Council came over to be our bookkeeper. Another former person from Bronx Council is doing our social media. These are people I could trust. These are people who knew, were highly professional and knew what had to be done and do it well, and didn't need to be managed. And so I was very fortunate. But then I said, you know, the fellowship program is a very significant program for us because we are the only ones that supporting photographers of color in New York State. And we give out 10 awards at $1,000 a piece. And it's a panel of professionals in the field are selected, and they review all the submissions and make the final decisions. No one in the staff of Enfocal has anything to do with it other than to make sure the process is managed with as much professionalism as possible and integrity. Whatever the panelists decided became the awards.
Bill, may I step in here and ask how, when you first started the fellowship program, one, how did you find funding? Like, where did the funding come from? And then was it hard to get applicants at the beginning? And do you have like more applicants each year that the program exists?
Well, the first year was 90 something applicants. The high we've ever had was 160, and the average now is between 115 and 130. And so basically 10% of the awards, 10% of the applicants are awarded. As for the funding, it came from a donor. And that person has continued to support it. And we just, the panel for the fellowship for the 6th year met 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and we now have 55 fellows that we have awarded. And the Nova Luz is being worked on now, and we have a special curator for Nova Luz and the exhibition. We could not have, funding for the artists is all too important to depend on foundations, corporations, and government. You know, they change their priorities. They question what your standards are. And my experience has been, and will continue to be, that you award artists for excellence, and then you make sure that when they receive the money, it's for their purposes only, not for any community. If they want to spend in the community, that's fine. They want to take a class, that's fine. They want to buy their spouses a gift, that's fine. But it is an important affirmation that they have reached a certain level of quality, that they've distinguished themselves from other artists because of the quality. Not every artist is going to be very successful. Not every artist is going to accept the fact that they did not win. And several have even challenged the integrity of the process. And I go to each panel process to make sure that the integrity is respected. Kim Rose, who manages the whole process, is there as well. And between the two of us, we're very committed to the integrity of the process. Are we happy sometimes with some of the selections? No, but that's personal preference, and I don't care. But I'm also aware of what it means to not be awarded one of the Enfocal fellowships. What does it mean? Is it failure? Or, as I tell a lot of them, and usually about another 10 others, that we actually ran out of money. Because if we had more money, we could have given 5, 10 more awards. But we wanted to make sure that the artists were not forgotten, those that came so close. And we created the Apartment Gallery series. And largely, because I didn't want to create a gallery series and where no one shows up. I want the people in the community to be part of the process. And we know that I know of some people, who converted their living room to a gallery. Some more of a professional gallery, some still at home with. But what it meant was that we were able to be part of a community and engage the community. We were able to recognize artists who didn't make the cut for the fellowships, but what we considered important enough to be part of this whole process, to be part of an exhibition. We usually do 3 a year. This year we're going to do 4. And we give them a fee. And we do a public program. Last year, all of this, we still continued during the pandemic. We had to do it virtual, and Kim and Oscar did a great job, and Juanita did a great job. It's wonderful when you realize that, hey, I don't have to worry about it. I have the staff. I have the staff to do it. Further, we also realize that some artists don't understand what the grantsmanship process is all about. It's as much an experience of how to do it. It's not just putting work together and submitting it. What is an artist statement? What does, how do you write your bio, your personal bio in 200 words? And more importantly, how does a panel review work? And last year we did, we invited any number of artists who participate in 10 shows, 10 or 12. And by the way, they all get fees. So it's not like we're not supporting artists. They're getting the fees, they're getting the recognition. And they were going to be exposed to a panel process. And we had two very gifted artists. One was a former fellowship winner, and the other was a colleague of hers, a media artist from the Midwest. And these artists sent in their works, and we had a Zoom, and each of the artists' works were reviewed as if it was on a panel. And the pointers were given, what you need to do to some cases it's presentation. You know, how does quality distinguish itself from quality? It's experience and how you present your work. On the other hand, if you're not a good artist, you will never make the cut. So we wanted everyone to understand that it wasn't biases on the part of the panelists. It was the commitment that the panelists had in terms of making the right decisions. And in this case, offering recommendations and tips how to better present their work. I'm not sure if the ones who were there applied this year and whether or not they received any real consideration. I'm not aware of it. My concern was that we make every effort to support as many of the artists who apply for the Enfocal Fellowship. It's all about, if you look at what we do and what Enfocal is, you have the fellowship program as the core. Then you have the monetary awards. Then you have Nova Luz. Then you have the apartment gallery series. Then you have the professional development initiative. All of that comes out of the initial of the fellowship program. If it wasn't for that, you would not have that stream, that connection that exists. That's all artist-based. Getting to Dos Mundos. And I bet you never thought I'd get to Dos Mundos. So, well, I'm getting close. I'm getting close. And the third year,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to ask you another question, but go ahead. Finish.
Oh, go ahead. I feel free.
So one of the things that I think is most difficult for an organization, and a role that I think a lot of organizations don't even try to tackle because of the difficulty of it, is trying to expose their artists and their community to other communities and other regions around the country. And I think one of the things that's wonderful about Enfoco is not only how they decided and organized this touring exhibition, but from the Nova Luz publication, it seems that your fellows are also exhibited in the Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, Oregon. And so I was wondering if you could talk to us about how that relationship started and the challenges that you faced putting this the Dos Mundos exhibition together, because it seems like it's been 5 years since it started.
3.5 years since the idea over martini came to my head. Never have an idea with a martini in your hand, because then you're stuck. Let me start with the Blue Sky Gallery. It's one of the best relationships I've ever had. Requires very little work on our part. Christopher Rauschenberg, who is the head of the Rauschenberg Foundation and lives in Portland, Oregon, and he is the president of the board of directors at the Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, came to Enfocal one day and said, Bill, we would like to celebrate your artists, and we would like to offer them solo shows. And he said, well, let's talk about it. I want to make sure that the integrity is done, that the artists have no cost, that everything is respected, and where do they stay, and what's being paid for. And all they ask is that they have the freedom to select 2 artists from the current fold of fellowship recipients. I had no problem with that, and I would give my recommendation, but if they wanted, and they would bring the 2 artists to Portland, and that was it. And they would get solo shows, get some sort of monographs, and then and next year, and then issues in Portland started to emerge, and then the pandemic, and now we're back to the. I think we've done 2. We've done 2 sets of artists in Portland, and now we have a 3rd set now. One is currently up, John Henry, and another one is will follow John Henry, and I've known of the Rauschenberg Foundation and its commitment to artists, and I did my research on Blue Sky Gallery, and they were perfectly legitimate and supported artists, and were very committed to providing opportunities. And I think this is one of the best relationships, and I give a shout out to the Blue Sky Gallery, its staff, Zemi and Molly, and the board of directors who have made it possible. And these, this is the type of relationships that are formed when they look at Nova Luz and say, this is quality. And Enfocal is organizing these fellowship programs, and they are incredible artists. And Oscar Rivera now is working with the Blue Sky Gallery to do a Zoom panel discussion with John Henry, one of the activists from New York City, and one other artist. And would be done jointly between Blue Sky and Enfocal. Those are the types of working relationships that I enjoy doing. And it's very rare that we have that type of support. But I want to make sure that integrity of the experience is respected. And I also want to make sure that the artists are respected, and that their concerns and it is a legitimate one. So it's not much more I can say about the Blue Sky Gallery, that if it ends after the 3rd year, we've done a good job. What happened? Very little goes on beyond 3 years. But if it continues, we will honor and respect what they have done and what their commitment has been to our fellowship recipients, our fellowship artists. We now have 55 artists. Who would have thought, when everyone thought that in 2015, Enfocal was going to close? So it's getting to those Mundos. I say it was time to do a special program and about our fellows, not an exhibit for the fellows that would be every artist has 2 images on a wall. I wanted a curated show, and I just didn't want to do a one-shot deal. because how would it be different than our fellowship exhibition and our apartment gallery? So I wanted something that would be very unique and reach audiences that have never been reached before. And I've known Sarah Pasty for the longest time, and my wife and I spend a lot of time. We do several trips to the Mid-Hudson Valley and stay in motels and inns there. And we started getting in touch with Sarah. I first met her when she did some consulting work for the Bronx Council of the Arts back in the 80s. And we developed a friendship, and she was telling us about the Dorsky, and I told her about this idea that I had. Wouldn't it be nice to showcase a number of fellowship recipients, to have a curated show? And wouldn't it be nice if it could travel? And wouldn't it be nice if the Dorsky Museum? And I've known Sarah for the longest time, and Sarah Pasty is a tough nut. She does not compromise quality, and so we had to get to know each other. But we knew each other as friends. Now we have to get to know her as professionals. Will she honor my artists, and does she have the trust and the quality of artists that we have in our fellowship? And I would show her Nova Luz magazines, past issues. I showed her material, and we spoke. And then there's an annual conference in the spring, late March, April, of all of the apartment chairs, or fine art apartment chairs of all of the gallery directors, museum directors, and they all come together. And Sarah managed to say, Bill, I have no control over this, but I did talk to people. There's a level of interest. They all check the website. It is up to you. And I was one of the presenters. The other one was, it escapes me at the moment. In any case, I made the presentation. And then nothing. Then some people started inquiring. Sarah would follow up. Let me step back a bit. I chose the name Dos Mundos because I needed to have a name. And I also remember that Dos Mundos exhibit that took place in 1973, that only elders my age would remember, or art historians or curators of that ilk would know. And it was such an important exhibit that was a catalyst for so much that happened in the Puerto Rican community, photography community, that eventually spread out to all communities. And I said, as an homage, I'm going to use that name so people can go and see it, go do the research, and I wanted to make sure that Enfocal came out of that. Dos Mundos. It was three of the artists from Dos Mundos came together to incorporate Enfocal. So there was a relationship, but the exhibit had nothing to do with the original show other than the title. But if you look at the concept, Dos Mundos back then was about Puerto Ricans and the mainland and Puerto Ricans and in Puerto Rico. Dos Mundos here was artists of color, of different ethnic groups, racial groups, and it was all about issues in their communities, issues with a larger community. So it was no longer Dos Mundos, but it was a type of Dos Mundos. But it was the work of the artist that was of special significance. the three artists from the original Dos Mundos, which was curated by Gino Rodriguez, the three artists that came out of there that incorporated En Foco back in 1964, Charlie Biasini Rivera, Roger Caban, who died a couple of years ago, and Phil Dante, who died maybe 15, 20 years ago. So of the three, only Charlie is still around. And, and Charlie and I and his wife and his daughter, we are still in touch. And it was an important, so what else do I do? I said, I need to identify not one curator, but two curators whose integrity I trusted and whose work. And by the way, the image you see is Charlie Biasini when he used to see that exhibit that he had there, that photography exhibit. He used to pack that up on the top of his car and bring it wherever there was a street festival or block party or some sort of community event. Charlie would show up, or him or somebody else would show up with these pop-up gallery. And part of the reason that he created En Foco was to make sure that Puerto Rican artists, Puerto Rican photographers are seen by a broader community. And you got to remember, this is the 70s, so it's largely a Puerto Rican population. So he wanted to make sure he would go to Brooklyn, Aguado, South Bronx, Newburgh, wherever there was a celebration, a community celebration, and they wanted to see Puerto Rican photographers. Charlie, and that is the work of Charlie Biasini. That was his commitment. In addition, he also curated a lot of exhibits further on in the latter part of the 70s. But getting back to two curators. I wanted two curators that was strongly committed to the notion of community that our artists create. Our artists are not second. Our artists are not second class. This is not a social work program. This is about quality. And the two people whose integrity I trusted are tough professionals. Juanita Lanzo, who you've heard me speak about, who ran the Longwood Gallery for 10 years, 15 years perhaps. And Stephanie Lindquist, who was a director of Bronx Art Center. And she was a curator, director, like the Marion Gallery. She was by herself. She had maybe a part-time person, a couple of volunteers. That's how she did her work. So having Stephanie involved with the Marion Gallery, it's like history repeating itself, or that's the way history is. And they essentially picked the 12 artists. Since no one was going to forget those Mundos and wanted to relate to the past, I said, well, you might as well pick 12 artists. It's the same number as the original Dos Mundos. And then they were making the selections and still waiting on different commitments. And I think it was a year and a half ago, 2019, where the commitments started to come in. Sarah helped me. Sarah didn't help me. Sarah wrote the proposal to NEA. Then there was the pandemic. Funders who I thought were coming in were not coming in. If the NEA didn't come in, it wasn't going to happen. We were living through the pandemic, and I wasn't sure if SUNY was going to be open. And if they were open, to what extent they would be open. And then our experience during this whole pandemic process was the value of going virtual and how we were able to generate audiences and support And I knew pretty much, and as Sarah, especially with the Dorsey, that they had, you know, they could do programs online, and that everyone could do a program online, or just like we're doing today. And, you know, yes, it would be nice to have visited the Marion Gallery. Yes, it would have been nice for us to celebrate an opening. But these conversations, your documentation, will always, always live. And there'll be a record of it. And it will be part of Enfocal's archives. And it will be part of the legacy of partnering with like-minded entities that are in SUNY. SUNY is a major entity, a major business corporation. Yeah, you call it college, I call it a corporation. And yet you have committed professionals like Hyra and Barbara here that made this exhibit happen. And then while the pandemic, I said, we still hadn't heard from the endowment. And I started to hint to Sarah that, you know, maybe we should start getting our stories together, what I should say in case we don't get the NEA. And sure enough, the NEA came in, and we couldn't pay the artists because the NEA, according to the NEA, we were limited, that we restricted public applications because we just selected artists of color, but all the related expenses. So it was something that we said, well, we're fine. And then Kim, Oscar, Sarah, they all started to work on it. And sure enough, it became a reality. Then was at the same time, we're trying to do, can I afford to do a catalog? I said, well, I have the funding for Nova Luz, and I was able to get an additional funding from one of the Bronx care health systems in the Bronx that supports a lot of my programs, and they're able to increase the amount for Nova Luz. And then I said, well, we can use that as a type of catalog. It will be created as a catalog, even though it says Nova Luz, be still a magazine, but it is, the integrity of it is about the catalog. We had guest columnists, Susanna Laval. She is a legendary curator and fine arts writer and columnist, and just worked so hard with so many in the Puerto Rican Latino community. And she lives up in Woodstock. I mean, she has a home up in Woodstock. Has been staying up in Woodstock during this whole pandemic. And she wrote a major article that's in the Nova Luz. Kiana Mestrich is a curator, is a professional photographer. And I think, well, it's important that I bring someone in from outside of the community, outside of my community, someone who can come in with a very select perspective about issues related to artists of color. You know, it's not just about being discriminated against, it's also about class. And how do we understand class? How do I understand class from the white perspective, or from the white perspective, how do they understand class in the Latino community, the Dominican community, the Puerto Rican community, or the African American community, the African community? How is that all mixed together? And so hers was a very strong piece. And I did an introduction that talked about the value and importance of Nova Luz. last year, 2020, when this was released, was the 35th anniversary of Nova Luz. 35 years of continuous publications. We started with four paper issues, and now we're down to 2 issues. We certainly haven't, I would like to expand it, but at this point, this is what we could handle effectively and professionally without undue stress. And if we had another issue, then we start to compromise staff. And that's less in this case is much, much better than doing something which we didn't have the capabilities of doing.
So Bill, I'd like to ask you one last question. And before I do that, I'd like to mention to the audience that we will like to answer any questions that you might have if they could kindly just write their question in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Just click on that and then it allows you to chat. But I also wanted to mention that the website, the Enfocal website, it has a wonderful interview with you and Charlie, one of the founders of Enfocal, and it also has a curatorial tour of the exhibition and other podcasts and videos of very moving artists and interviews with that. So my last question is, now that you have seen, or maybe that is one of the questions, is do you consider this tour a success? And if it is, do you have any other or future plans to do more of these with the fellows of Enfocal or anything else?
Well, it was a success in spite of the funding, in spite of the pandemic. We made many new friends. I reacquainted myself with old friends, especially artists from the original Dos Mundos. We lost Benedict Fernandez, who was a wonderful artist who founded the Parsons Department of Photography, and an incredible activist, photographer in the 60s and 70s. We lost him about 2 weeks ago. We lost Corky Lee, part of the Asian community. We lost Adal Maldonado, a major Puerto Rican photographer. We lost him about 2 months ago. Those people who leave legacies, these are legacies that need to be preserved. And one of the things, what the future is more like the theme of the movie Back to the Future. I started raising the money for archives to preserve our histories, to preserve our legacies. In those archives, somewhere, there may be an exhibit that will tour. I'm interested in negotiating with other major cities that have strong photography commitments to see how we can develop an exhibition exchange program. I'm hopeful that Juanita and Stephanie and Kim and Oscar and Ron and whoever else I left out, Frankenmeyer, who has been around with Enfocal since the 70s, who is the chair of the board of directors. So many people. The responsibility is going to, Nestor Perez Moliere, who's our archivist, is doing a great job putting it. Our histories are going to be our future. Our histories are going to help define where we're going in the future. I would like to think that I would be around, but at 3/4 of a century, I'm hopeful that my work, the people I work with, will continue, and I'll always be around to help. I think the fellows play play an important role. And I want to continue that support. And we, by the way, we publicize anyone who we know that we receive info on a special event, a special award, a special presentation. We make sure that we stream them. We make sure that we publicize them. This week, we added a new grants program, awards, with media artists, works in progress. What we realized that the current generation of photographers are basically media artists who extract images from the media work that they do. This is the younger generation. It's still a lens generation, but it's not an analog generation anymore. Though some work on it. I would like to see something, and I would like to help fundraise for it. I would like to help make it possible. But I think the leadership is going to have to come from a younger generation. And I'm hopeful that, you know, whether it's Juanita or Kim or any of the family at Enfocal or past, you know, I want to acknowledge, you know, besides Charlie Beer Sr., there was Marion Art, who was the interim, the director between Charlie and myself. There's Marisol Diaz, who was very instrumental in setting the standard for artists at Enfocal. So, you know, there are a lot of, but I want to help be a catalyst for others to move the agenda forward and have their voices heard.
So the last question that we have from the audience is, and this is from Hyla, how do you build excitement and encourage community participation in exhibitions?
Well, we had an exhibit at the Apartment Gallery. I'll cite you two examples from the Apartment Gallery. One was in Harlem, the Hamilton Galleries, and there's this legendary African-American photography group that was at the Whitney, if I'm not mistaken, or MoMA, I forget which. Kamunji. We met with two of the founders, founded in the early 60s. So you can imagine that they're at the point, they're still active, but not as, and we met with them, and the Kamunji always had the reputation of a special quality that supports the African-American community, its heritage, its integrity, and what have you. And we asked them to pick 3 artists who best represented their legacy and were part of our fellowship applicants, not recipients. And they selected 3 artists, and the exhibit was very popular. And then we did a panel with them. And what was a living room? We had about 30 people, and we had 2 of the Kamunji founders and 1 of the artists give a presentation, have a conversation with the audience. The audience was all from Harlem, all over, and people who were interested in photography came to this. You know, when you add value, and then you open your doors, and it's not an intimidating place like a gallery. Am I allowed in? It's a gallery usually denotes a class issue. Well, that's not my class, so I don't go. But we walked into Kim Hamilton's home, and they were pretty cool about it, you know, and so it was just a good experience. The spring before that, in East Mott Haven, the South Bronx, it's a historic district, and Idelsa Rivera, if I'm not, I'm sorry, names at this point escape. I know first names. Let us use her home. Well, she's part of the East Harlem Historic District. I mean, East Mott Haven Historic District. And they decided to do a tour because issues of displacement and gentrification are very prominent in the South Bronx. And these are These are two, there was Samuel Brown and Idelsa. It'll come to me, hopefully. Both own homes, and Samuel organized this tour of the neighborhood. We had about 60 people show up on the tour. And this was part of we just don't do exhibits, we do a public function. And this year we're hoping to do more. We anticipated it would not be as serious, but we're still cautious about doing our public programs. A third public program we did was Juanita, who curated the show, but we couldn't do the public program, so Juanita did the interview online. It is about your integrity, honesty, and giving people an opportunity to come and see your work at home. We say a gallery is a home, and our home in the community is for you. And that's what works. That is what has worked for us. It's that level of intimacy, that level of, I can go in if I want to, or I don't have to. But if you go into one of the galleries, major art galleries, you're not going to feel comfortable enough to go in because of the message. It says that you have to be of a certain class. Here in the South Bronx, Harlem, we hopefully hope to establish one in the Muslim community in Brooklyn. It's all about meeting people, engaging people. That is the success.
Well, Bill, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. It's really wonderful and insightful. I also want to thank you for your commitment to professionalism and, as you mentioned, integrity, but also respect for the artists in everything they do. I also want to remind the public who is in or near Fredonia that the exhibition is up till Sunday. It's a wonderful exhibition, and I think it's everybody will enjoy seeing it. It's very moving. And I'll leave the closing to Hyla, see if she has anything to say.
Well, it's been such a privilege hosting this exhibition, and I wish I had a recording and I could document every conversation that has started in the gallery. Like you said, Bill, like sometimes I feel like, we have this classy entranceway and it looks very fancy and quiet and elitist in the gallery because everything's presented in such a special way. And I often just holler out the door and say, come in. Have you come check this out, take a look, and try to make it less intimidating and more casual. But just seeing the students that have come in and the conversations that we've had about race and class and economic situations and differences and diversity and privilege, things like that come through artwork and come from photography. It's just really been an honor to host this. And I'm always looking for ways, and we're looking for ways to build that community to make people feel at home and make them want to come in and visit and bring friends.
Well, issues of class within our community is something that needs to be addressed. And that may be a topic or a theory or a show may evolve from that. Issues of class. And I've seen it over and over. And how people get easily disappointed, how people are rejected without having openly being rejected, the sense of rejection of one, like you just mentioned. And I don't want to see that happen anymore to anyone. We're all deserving of the best. And I want to thank Professor Rey for being patient with me. And if you're ever in New York City or the Bronx, please let us know. And I was hoping to go to Fredonia, and I knew things were going to happen. Before the show opened, I was crossing the street it's in North Bronx or Yonkers, and this man approaches me, passes me by. He has a sweatshirt that says Fredonia. Damn, this is going to be, it's going to be a good show. It's going to be a good experience. I know it.
You're welcome anytime.
So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Alberto, for moderating. I appreciate you both. And maybe we could do this again sometime.
I would love it.
Let's do another En Foco show.
Maybe the two of you like to co-curate a show with us. It's always a possibility. I'm easy. All I need is a martini. Right, Juanita? All I need is a martini, and I'm very happy.
Totally. Yeah, it will be amazing. Thank you so much for having us at Fredonia. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for your
and then Juanita makes me look intelligent. Oh, how did you pick Juanita? That was a no-brainer. Contract with Juanita and stay out of her way. No, it's the pleasure is working with an incredible group of people, and Alberto and you too, and Barbara, really extraordinary. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you've seen a lot of traffic. We've steered a lot of people toward that Enfocal website. It's an invaluable resource to have all the images available online and the information about the artist and some of the sound bites. Every time Deja Harris in particular, every time I listen to her talk about her work, it brings me to tears. And we appreciate everything that you put together. I hope that you can see the uptick in traffic because we're sending people your way.
And thank you for inviting us to your home.
All right. Maybe we can do it again.
Alberto, Barbara, thank you very much.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Adios.